going to talk about two things today. Kind of one and a half. We might not quite get through the second one. But the first one I want to talk about is dependencies. And this is again like the missing scrolls, the ancient manuals of project management. This was something that was really considered really important when you were taught as a project manager in the ancient times of 20 years ago. And then with the revolution that Martin and others brought in, it kind of fell away, but it can still really mess you up. And in fact, the things I'm going to talk about today are really part of that project managing thinking hat, okay? These ones actually do apply to pretty much anything that you want to deliver, the two things I'm going to talk about today. So I think they're absolutely central and they're often overlooked. So I'm calling it depends, like classic consultant's answer, but no, it really does. But these things can seriously mess you up. And you actually see it playing out all the time, whether you're registering that or not. So, of course, the trick is to try and discover these dependencies early. We'll talk a little bit about that today. There's only a couple of things that I want you to know about them. When I say you've probably seen this without realising it, like when you have a program stand up, so you've got a whole series of projects going on, remember that's a lot of what we're talking about here, multiple streams of work. Very often you'll get people who have been trying to get towards a deadline and they'll stand up and they'll go, oh, we're ready, but we're still waiting for the SAP guys. You know, they're just not quite ready. And that's not really an acceptable answer because it is no mystery to us that SAP has slow delivery cycles. And actually that's something you should have figured out right back at the beginning. Not standing up in front of the entire organisation and saying, oh, we're not ready, and trying to blame it on somebody else who happens to have a slow release cycle. So that's I'm going to sound like a jet engine. Yeah. If someone can mute, that would be good. Prachi, maybe it's you? I don't know. So yeah, that's an example.
No, I was not. I'm not.
That's an example of not catching a dependency when it really matters and how it can bite you in the backside. And you would have heard many people give that excuse. So why did we stop talking about dependencies? Well, we try as hard as we can to cut stories that don't have dependencies, right? We try really hard to do that. And in times of ancient oldness, people would not work on a full slice. There was no such thing as stories. And so you'd have teams with dependencies everywhere. So you'd have like the database team over here and, you know, the front end team over here and the engineers here and the designers over there, literally in different buildings sometimes, certainly in different teams, not sitting together. And these people depended on each other for every single piece of work. So you literally couldn't do anything at all without worrying about dependencies. Then we tried to eliminate those by slicing our stories better and having cross-functional teams, which is brilliant. And we're actually still having those dependencies, but we're resolving them really quickly with quick conversations inside the team. Win, that's great. We try to do that, but sometimes they can still pop up, and they're absolutely real. And the example I gave you before is, you know, trying to hook into a finance system is a great example. You can't really deliver a finished feature unless you can kind of bill for it in some way. And unless you can hook into the finance system, you're not going to be able to bill for it. And that's as true for us as it is for any organisation. And even if you want to eliminate a dependency, you first need to understand that it's there. So any dependency that you find is a risk, which is to say it's an issue that hasn't happened yet. Okay? So you need to discover these things. You need to understand them because they're going to mess you up. So there's really only kind of two things that I want you to know about dependencies. And there's, you know, if you go and study them, there's all this stuff. No, I want to boil it down to two things, other than the fact they're real. One is they always have a direction. Okay, so if you hear people talking about we depend on each other, you know, or we depend on them and they depend on us, they haven't thought about it enough. Right? You may have two very specific dependencies on another group, and they may have one or two specific dependencies on you, but those arrows never have two. It's never a two-headed arrow. Okay, these are specific and they are directional. And again, if you can't answer the question of who depends on who for this particular piece of work, you will screw up. You will be late. You will not deliver it on time. How can you? You don't even know what the other team needs to do before you can even start. So you're gone, right? So if it seems bidirectional, break it down, talk to your tech leads, talk to your fantastic technical people until you get it into directional grains, because those two things will have very different effects on you, right? If someone else depends on you, in a purely selfish sense, happy days, right? Just keep going, right? That's very different to I depend on you before I can sometimes even start, let alone finish. So don't go around talking about, we depend on each other. It's just a sign of sloppy thinking. You really need to break it down to understand what's going to happen to you. And again, precision really, really matters. I really don't like hearing people say, well, we depend on single sign-on, and that is a classic thing that we all depend on, right? Okta is an example. Really? That's pretty vague. Which piece of your solution depends on that? And does all of it depend on that? And what kind of dependency is that? And again, your tech leads know all of this stuff. They know it really, really well because they have to engineer the solutions to it. So let's try and express them as precisely as we can, because that's how we're going to find solutions to these things, and so they don't screw us up. So try, which bit do you depend on, especially to begin something that's particularly toxic to your delivery? You can't even start until these other people are finished. I'll talk a bit later about what we can do about that. So they have direction, and then there's just two kinds I want you to worry about. Forget all the others, they're not important. There's really two, the finish start and the finish finish. And the finish start one is, we can't start until that team is completely finished. Okay, you can see why that one's going to make your life really hard. Okay, so moving to the whiteboard, I don't know if we have that covered. So in a finish start dependency, here's team A, here's team B. You actually can't even start your work until these guys are finished. Finish start. Right, so you understand the direction of the dependency, and you understand the type of the dependency. The second one that you likely to find is a finish finish. And that means, say you've got two teams here, A and B. Here's that one. You can't finish until they're done. Okay, so for example, you can mock up the service, but you can't actually go live until both of these things are really honestly done. And a lot of what great tech leads do, and what ThoughtWorks has been quite successful at doing, and part of good project management, is figuring out how you can turn finished starts into finished finishes. Because obviously with this one here, you can actually get done a lot earlier because you can do stuff in parallel. And that's what's so great. Is it mocks or stubs, Carl? I don't want to get shot. Mocks, right? I don't want to get shot for my bad mocking and stuff talking. But yeah, so turning a finished start into a finished finish, that is our meat and potatoes, or our dal, depending on what you like eating. That's absolutely at the core of what we do. And those are technical discussions typically, and they happen between technical people. We don't have non-technical people like project managers sitting around, telling developers what they should and shouldn't do. We have tech leads sitting down and figuring out, because this is going to be a technical answer here. It's going to be something like a mock or something, maybe. So that's all I want you to know. I want you to understand the direction of it, and I want you to understand if it's a finish start or a finish finish. And this will prevent you from being that person at the program wall who stands up and says, we're late and it's SAP's fault. We don't do that. Okay, so they're always directional, and can you turn a finish start to a finish finish? If you can get it done sooner. So what do? Oh, I'm going to show you some research that Dave Coles did. Dave Coles rocks. This is from Telstra. He looked at 179 cards over 7 iterations. So that's a reasonable amount of data. And this has been this piece of information that Dave found out has been used all around the world to prove this point to many clients. And what he figured out by studying the mingle data was that if a card stayed inside the team and could be executed inside the team, it executed 12 times faster than a card that had a dependency on another team. Just think about that. That's how much faster you will go. Why is it that bad? Well, one of the reasons is, say in my team I need to get this done, but oh, we need the front end team, or we need the Allen team to do X, Y, or Z. That's not going to be right at the top of their priority list. They've already got a shed load of work on, and so it is going to slow you down. And you're going to be over there every week or every day talking to them about this piece of work they don't really want to do. So yeah, that's some real research that Dave did. It takes 12 times as long. They had 1 in 6 cards leaving the team. And there's the figures that came out. 2 days versus 23 days, cycle time. Okay, so what do you need to do when you discover these dependencies? These should be coming out through your early kind of tech discussions as part of your, if not discovery, then probably inception. So first thing, very important, of course, we're going to visualize this thing. We're going to make a map of these dependencies. I'll show you some examples later. You need to talk to this team constantly, okay? Ideally, you shouldn't be in this situation. We would really like to avoid dependencies, but they're part of life. And so you're going to be having a lot of conversations with that other team. You're going to try and plan in the same room. If you're doing an iteration planning meeting or even release planning, please have someone from that team in the room. Do not do your planning and then go to them afterwards and say, oh, in our planning, we figured out that we absolutely depend on you to come in, at this particular time. And if you don't do that, then we're going to be screwed and everything's going to be screwed, right? That's not very nice. Let's have them in the room with you if you depend on them, and let's do that planning together so that we can get there together. Does that make sense? If you can, co-locate. I've got a story about that later. And here's the flip side of that coin. I kind of joked about it, I shouldn't earlier. Be aware of how other teams depend on you, okay? Because you're also putting other people in this situation. And if you do what I said, which was just like, happy days, keep going, that's not fair on them. So you have to treat other people's dependencies with respect as well, or we all will not get there together. And remember, right back at the beginning when we talked about the role of the project manager, the role of the project manager is to fall in love with that greater goal. That includes everybody succeeding. It's not just your little bit of it. You don't win by getting over the line when other people don't. So think about, be aware of how other teams depend on you. This absolutely requires cake. So just some examples of visualizing dependencies. This is using Stream. This is a well-known way to do it. I've done it this way. It creates a problem, obviously, when things move. You have to cut a new piece of string. But you can see on this story here, there's 3 keys. There's 3 teams here. There's purple. There's sort of orange. No, not purple. It looks like orange, blue, and red. Kind of depend on each other. And I'll come back to this later. Okay, and Kalish Watson, who did this visualization, said at the end of each piece of string is a conversation. So every one of those, she's discovered them, she's made them visible. Okay, they're not directional, but the way that she's thinking of that and the team's thinking of that is, this means we have to talk about this thing a lot, because what I do is going to affect you and vice versa. Wow. That is amazing. Look at all those dependencies. Now, this is from the SAFE method, which, we don't recommend, but just a really interesting picture. This is how they did it at Lego. And you can see just the sheer number of dependencies that they discovered there in there. They have these crazy big, massive kickoffs. Okay, this is how it's done in Suncorp. We're going to mention some clients this morning. You need to remember that this is client confidential, okay? Most of this information, I'm pretty confident, is very old and probably not very relevant, but it's still client information. So before I go on to this, any questions? No. Okay. I'm really sorry. It's very hard to make this interactive. I usually do this. We have an exercise that we do with cards I can't do that equally for everyone here, and it wouldn't play well on audio and just video, so I've taken it out. So the only interaction that's going to come is if you get me to stop talking by asking questions. Save yourselves. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay.
I have a question, Nick.
Yay! Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So the dependency which you talked about, which was the second one, I can't remember the right name for it.
Finish.
Finish. Or the one which you spoke about, the mocks and stubs.
Yeah, finish. Mocks, not stubs.
I was on a team where the ThoughtWorks team was doing the UI, and there was Oracle team doing the downstream services. And obviously, we started working. We were given their specs, and we worked out of the specs, which using mocks and developed a UI for the front end. The challenge we noticed as we started integrating, because we had the opportunity to integrate after around 4 or 5 months. The project was supposed to finish in 7 months. That quite a few specs had changed as we integrated, and it created a lot of trouble. And it was a big surprise to Suncorp when we had already raised this, that this has a risk in the end, but as long as you're aware and you're okay to wear it, ThoughtWorks is okay to start working on it. It didn't come across as pointing to anyone, but yes, it was eventually challenging because they didn't have money and they had to roll off all the UI devs. And then there was a lot of bugs and defects left to someone to fix who did not know the UI very well.
There you go. Yeah, dependencies are really tough to manage and are at the root of most, I guess, if you want to think of it in terms of schedules or, in large programs of work, why people are unable to keep their commitments. Absolutely. And that's very timely because at Suncorp, they obsess over these things. In the LSP, which is a huge program of work, probably it's touched everyone here in one way or another, they obsess over dependencies. And I just thought I'd share with you the way that they do it as an example. So they break a dependency, they've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 7 different kinds of dependencies that they want to keep track of here. And actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So they have a way of kind of reporting, I guess, on the status of that dependency, because they know if all their dependencies are green, then they're pretty green. They're pretty good to go. And across, LSP coordinates across 32 different teams they're used to. But if they keep track of those dependencies, which they do obsessively, then they know they're basically going to be pretty good. So the dependency is considered green if the dependent stream requires the feature and the delivery stream, they call them dependent and the delivery stream can deliver it in time. Green, good to go. The next state they have is if I depend on you and, well, not quite, but I can deliver it in the same week, they would say that's orange. If you can't do it in the same week, then you're red and you get onto their issues target. And that is quite an uncomfortable place to be. That was probably not important. So this is an example of a sheet that they use. I've sort of stripped out most of the confidential information on it, but you can see every week, this was back on the 13th of May, a few years ago, every week they go through and you can see where these dependencies lie across the whole program of work. Look at all those teams, look at all those features. So they know where the dependency lies. You can see that 2 of those have turned out red. 1, 2, 3, 4 are red. They have people who go working across the program who get extremely worried about this. So how does the rhythm work? How do you sync up all of this work and how do you get visibility across 30 teams? It's really hard. The way they did it, and this was primarily started by a genius thought worker called Zane Gambasson, who later moved to London. Monday, probably a day of rest, I don't know. Tuesday was sync day. So on Tuesday, you would get a call from Zane. He'd go, okay, let's get our schedules out. Let's have a look. Now, that thing that you were talking about for December the 1st, are you still good for that? Yep. You still good for the September the 1st? You still good for you still. He would go through and check off all of the feature level things that you'd shared across the whole program, including the dependencies. So by the end of Tuesday, because you can't, if you've got a program wall, like that big one that I showed you for Suncorp, for the LSP, you can't keep it in sync all the time. How are you going to do that? That is not practical. You have teams in sort of 4 or 5 different countries. So you work on a weekly sync process. So Monday, and I think Tuesday is sync day. So by the end of Tuesday, across all the time zones, Zane has produced a picture of truth ready for Wednesday, which is program stand-up. This is the way we typically do it on a fortnightly. Am I speaking quickly? Am I gibbering? No. On a weekly or fortnightly basis. You just sync up so that you've got a moment of truth, a day of truth, somewhere in the middle of the week, and that's when you have your program stand-up. So Zane syncs everything. Now that big wall that I showed you a photo of, that I'm going to show you again later, is true. It's true on Wednesday morning when we have program stand-up. Everyone comes to the wall, or if they can't attend, they have a great video conferencing system with a proper lens in it that they spent money on, not like this one. And people call in. And specifically at that, people update, you know, oh, this card's gone red, this feature's gone red, and particularly they talk about dependencies. Now then, on Thursday, what that triggers then is, I heard that Alan's team, their dependency is red, so they've now, people are depending on them and they are running late. That's the crucial piece of information. It has a direction. And holy moly, there are 7 teams that depend on Alan, and so now the news that he's running a week late that we just got is really bad news. So then, if you don't have really great answers for how that's going to change, see, if you have unconvincing answers, you get onto the issues target, which is a big red target, which means you are now on, you're on Praveen's target now or something. You're on really, you really better look out because you're going to start getting phone calls on Thursday and Friday to sort through what are the underlying issues here. Do you see the power of a dependency now? You've got 7 teams that depend on you. You're late. You're now making 7 other teams late. So that's how they run it at LSP last time I checked with Praveen. So you don't want to end up here. So this is that wall. Look at all those teams. Amazing. And that process I just talked about that goes through the week, that's Zane's wall. Syncs all of that up. Fabio Pereira took that photo. And up here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 who were red for some reason, whose dependencies were red. So that's an example from Suncorp. Here's an example from Spotify. A while ago, I don't know if they do it still, but at Spotify, each squad keeps track of their dependencies. And one of their pieces of work is to try and eliminate every single one of them by engineering, if possible. So their goal, and you can see here, they've got most of their dependencies are red and 2 are green. Now in product teams, you're pretty much working on the same kind of stuff over and over again, right? You're linking up to the same systems over and over again. So the teams, one of the things they report on in their team health is how are you going, eliminating all those dependencies so you can go fast and have less risk. Okay, now here's a bit of a weird way to think about dependencies, which is the way my brain actually works on it. There's one way to visualize them, is that they're social networks. So I depend on Alan. Alan depends on Eric. Alan also depends on Carl. We all depend on Carl, right? And so I use social network mapping software to visualize them because I think that's a really simple way to visualize things. This is actually our sponsor network here. What sort of happens for free and automatically in those systems, those social network systems, is, let's say, so if a lot of people rely on Alan, then his name is going to come up bigger. But if Carl relies on Alan and lots of people rely on Carl, that equally sums up and makes Alan incredibly important, because now if Alan goes late, then Carl will go late, and then all of these people will go late. So I think of it like a social network and visualize it that way. Now, again, this is client confidential, but this is a real example. And you see the dependencies here, you see the arrows on them. And you can see the most important one here is the one called Bravo Miletta First Bag API. It's got so many dependencies on it, and it's actually made larger. Now, when you visualize dependencies, please give as much context as you can, okay? Let's say there's 2 features that depend on each other, but they're inside the same team. I don't really care. It's not going to probably make a huge difference. But, you know, if there's a dependency, I depend on Alan, and he's in a different team, or he's in a different country, he's in a completely different location, that's really good context to have, right? So try to give context. I actually think in that way, the Suncorp one of just making a list, could be better. But people do what they do, and that program ran really well. So that's how I visualize them. There's free social network mapping software on the web that you can use, or one called Gephi that's great. It's not on the web. So yeah, please add context. 2 examples. One I'm going to give here. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is, again, one of those pieces of social network mapping software. Oh, but you can't see it. Why can't you see it?
It's only shared that one.
Bugger.
Which is how you really get the
All right. Well, it's really cool. And if you saw it, you'd think it was great, but you can't see it.
Can we add it afterwards and send it?
I hope so, yeah. That would be good. Okay, so I can't show you that, but it doesn't matter. But I want to show you something on the board over here. This is true ancient wisdom, and it's also what you're about to hear involves it's not safe for work, involves some rude words that are not allowed to be spoken at ThoughtWorks. Because I am going to speak of Gantt charts. I shall speak of them. I'm not afraid. Dan Gower will not tell on me. Right, now I'm taking you really back into the mists of time, ladies and gentlemen. Way, way back. So what are these Gantt charts that we're so afraid of, these horrible Gantt charts? Must never do it. We talk about this. It's so shocking. Right. Frederick Gantt was just a young dude at the time of the First World War, and an English guy. And the First World War was the largest mobilization of people and stuff that had ever happened, ever. And so, yeah, that required a little bit of project management. Like you think of all the fronts in Europe and all the materials coming across. And yeah, there were certain dependencies there. There's no point having a giant, death machine at the Somme unless you have ammunition for it, as an example. And so Frederick Gantt stole from a Polish guy and invented the Gantt chart, which was that's where it came about during the First World War, to plan the movement of munitions. And it was really a great innovation at the time. So when I say add context, I'm going to show you now one of these banned pieces of contraband that we don't talk about at ThoughtWorks, called Gantt chart. So here's all of the pieces of work that people are doing. And you can see here, these dots, these are the dependencies. And you can see here is a finish dependency, like I showed you earlier. And here is a finish start dependency. So ideally, I would like to, that's nice, I would like to color code these so I can see what teams are doing them, so it looks a bit more agile. I might, do something weird with the lines, with the curly, anything but a Gantt chart, my God. But you notice something interesting here, because this is now the crucial piece of ancient wisdom. You see here, there's this finish start dependency here. We try to make that into a finish if we could. And then there's this other dependency here that drops down, and then this long task here. Right, so this here, 1, 2, and 3, that's called the critical path, because that is the shortest time in which you can execute this project. The secret knowledge of the ancients. Everything else can just move around. Who cares? These things here, they could happen here. They could probably happen back here, back here. I'd like to get them done as early as possible, but they don't give it doesn't matter at all. Do you get it? How cool is that? Ancient wisdom, right? That is called the critical path. And yes, if you have a map of dependencies and it's just a cool looking social network, and you don't understand when these things are going to finish, then you're also screwed. So time is a really important context. And that's something kind of like a Gantt chart that I just did, but that didn't happen, okay? Nobody saw nothing. Don't tell Ange.
We have you
Don't tell Ian Oz. Don't tell anyone.
We have you on video.
Oh my God, I'm on video. Don't tell Pat Seineke. Oh my God. Okay. Don't ever use Gantt charts. They're horrible. And we hate them. But yeah, that was the original point of them, is to show the dependencies. And yeah, you get the bit about the critical path. That's kind of cool to know, right? And that's why sometimes in those big program stamps, you'll see someone will go like, oh, I'm going to be 6 weeks late. And everyone's just, oh. They don't care because it's not on the critical path. They understand the dependencies. They've unlocked the ancient wisdom. That was my whiteboard session there. Thank you for the zooming up, Alan. All right, just a few things to get back into your brain. I think there's only a few things I want you to just take away from that whole rant that I did. Dependencies are always directional. Struggle to find out and understand whom it depends on whom, because otherwise you shall probably not succeed. Or they're always specific. So when you hear really great teams, really good delivery people, they won't talk about, we depend on the single sign-on. They will talk specifically about the exact dependency. And only by understanding that can you defeat it. And it's good for the whole team to know that, by the way, even though it is inevitably a piece of technical, usually technical. It's great for everybody to understand exactly where that dependency lies. And your job is to make sure these conversations take place and to understand these dependencies, and you can't escape that. All right, that's the end of that part. Any questions? I hear the ThoughtWorks thought police coming. They found out about my Gantt chart. And yes, Gantt and Taylor, the villain of the piece who kind of dehumanized management forever, Gantt did work with Taylor. They had a little bit of a bromance, and David Joyce actually used to show a diagram of the first Gantt chart, and you can see it looks exactly like Microsoft Project, and it's just inked in by hand. And yeah, Taylor and Gantt did work together, and but toward the end of his life, Gantt actually reflected. He was really a great writer, and he used to write in the papers and stuff. And he actually reflected on a lot of what the stuff he'd done with Taylor, and came around to pretty much saying, look, there's no point paying people to hit KPIs. You have to trust that the team will work it out. You have to believe that people will do the best in the circumstances they're in. So interesting, again, to dig into the detail of some of these stories that we think we know. Okay, I'm going to stop and have a little drink. I think we've got time to, like I said, we might not finish this. This is now right into the core of one of the key activities that PMs do, release planning. Does anybody not know what release planning is? Dan, do you know what release planning is?
I do not know what release planning is.
Okay, so if we're running iterations, or periodically, we'll do sort of short-term planning. So we might have what we call an IPM, iteration planning meeting, where we get down and actually plan in quite exquisite detail the next 2 weeks. But release planning is that sort of longer view that we take. We would definitely be doing some at the beginning, but we probably would do it every few months again. And it gives us sort of a longer view of what our plan is, what we plan to execute, which features we want to ship, what customer value we want to bring, and roughly when that's going to happen. Okay? And it's also then something that inevitably gets shared with other teams because we all depend on each other. And it's that stuff that then ends up on that big wall, like I showed you, the LSP wall. So it's the kind of large-scale planning. It's like, when you're talking with your family, about, next week we'll do this, and, the week after we'll do that. It's not, you need to get up and brush your teeth and go to school now. It's that sort of longer-term, quite fuzzy picture of the larger pieces of value. Now, the way I'm going to talk about doing this today is the no estimates method. And this was taught to me by a guy called Neil Craven, who's a wonderful thought worker in Manchester or London. And when I was talking to him about it, he said he wished he had never called it that. So this became a hashtag, there's blog posts about it, it became like quite a big deal. But he said it's not actually the no estimates method, it was actually kind of a rant against points. It was the no points method, don't use points. Because in Agile planning, we sometimes use story points. And he kind of was able to demolish that. But he used this word no estimates, and he said it would have been much better if I'd called it no point, right? Because then that's like a nice little pun. And it's actually what he was trying to say. And in the blog post, if you go and look up no estimates, he explains exactly why. And he shows you, again, remember we had Dave Cole's data out of Bingle? He shows you all this data that he's pumped out of Jira. And just time and time again, he shows story points and just number of cards. Story points and number of cards. And the lines are just identical. So if you stand back from it a bit, Neil's point is, who really needs points? It's delivering exactly the same kind of transparency. Don't forget, what is the point of all this? Why do we estimate? It's to show progress. It's to communicate to other teams roughly when we think things are going to happen, and also to show our intent. If I'm going to say, hey, we've got this fantastic new feature, we need to get it out by the end of the year, and we're going to, we better have thought through how that's possible. We might change our mind, so let's do it lightweight. Let's make it easy. Is this making sense? Yep. All right, release planning. So we're not talking about big upfront planning here, but we are talking about some upfront planning. We're talking about kind of just enough upfront planning. We don't want it to be too laborious. And remember, an estimate is not a promise. Okay, if people are going to commit around dates, then a whole team needs to do that and needs to believe in it. That is not the same as walking up to a developer and tapping them on the shoulder and saying, you're going to finish by Tuesday, and they go, yeah, I think so. And then somehow on Tuesday you show up and it hasn't happened. So an estimate is not a promise. If you are getting estimates, another great thing to think about is, can you possibly give a range, and can you think about it as a range? We do not want to have an environment where people are made to pay a penalty for doing this, and it's extremely distasteful for a lot of developers because they've been burned over and over again. Somebody's walked up to them and said, how long do you think this would take? And they, in really good faith, have said X, Y, and Z. We have, in good faith, discovered more as we've moved through, and it's not going to happen. And these people have been burnt over and over again. And so it's an important part of our job as project managers, but please be respectful in the way that you do it. And remember that this is people, when we have the least knowledge, when we have the most knowledge is when we're almost done. Actually, after we're done. Right now is the very beginning, we have very little knowledge. So we do just enough upfront planning. We do it at the last responsible moment. And as we're building, we want to do iterative versus incremental. So forgive me for going back to the basics here, but that's kind of what we're doing. At the top here, this is an incremental approach to painting the Mona Lisa. So you can see, to actually do this, actually we need to know everything that's here right at the start. Right? That doesn't really make any sense. That's not what we're doing. We're being iterative. So initially, this is kind of what a release plan is here. Dan, we're just sketching it out. We're going, okay, there's going to be a mysterious woman in the foreground, and then we might actually sort of build some of that and plan some of that in detail, but the rest of it's still shaky and can change. And we've done the hands, Is this useful? Is this useful? Not really. Is this useful? Yes. Learning as I'm going, and great process, great way to go. So we do not work incrementally. That's the difference. Estimation, our best wrong answer. They're all wrong. They're all wrong. All estimates are wrong. It's just a question of by how much. Worth reminding people of this from time to time. There's a story that goes with that, but I don't think we've got time, so keep going. Right, so every method of estimation is wrong. They're all wrong because it's a wrong answer. And some of them I think are more wronger than others. So what's wrong with estimating using days? So I see that Carl is coding. I walk up to Carl, I say, look, Carl, this thing here, this story here, how long do you think this would take? He says, look, so we talk about it for a while, and he says, I think 3 days, and let's say it's Monday. And there was a fundamental misunderstanding in that conversation already that we're trying to eliminate. We actually were talking different things. What I really meant to say to Carl, but didn't, was if this was your first priority and you had no other work on and everything went well, nobody walked up to you and asked you 10,000 irrelevant questions, and you didn't get sick, and you did nothing else, how long would it take you? I didn't put that part in because the answer to that would be, it depends, and would be entirely different. Carl just said 3 days because he's a great person. But I've walked away with this fundamental misunderstanding because it's Monday And now come Wednesday, I'm going to start thinking like, all right, now that bit's going to be done. Carl will be done with that, and you do this other thing. Completely missed each other there, okay? So we don't estimate. That's only one of the reasons we don't estimate using days. Sometimes, so that's what's wrong with that method, I guess, one of the things. Estimating using cycle time. Cycle time is just sort of time to value. So what you would do is over time you would notice how long it took a card to get from the left of the board to the right. Oh, and you start to learn as you go. I've got examples where I won't show you today. Oh, a medium takes 7 working days. Or, a 3-point story takes 5 days on average over time. That's a great method, but you won't have it at the start, so it's entirely useless for release planning. Everything's done. Yes, you can estimate using t-shirt sizes, but at some point you're going to have to translate that to time, because if you're in a program of work and you have to dependencies on other people, it's not very helpful unless you start talking about time at some point. You're going to need to communicate about time. If we're going to get there together, there's no point for Alan to be working on his piece, in December when we're supposed to finish in September, right? So t-shirt sizing, yeah, that's fine. Estimating using animals or fruits, that's really good. But again, you will end up saying things like, we will be late by an elephant, but team B is ahead by a small dog. So overall, we'll be late by 2 weasels, right? Again, not that useful a conversation. At some point, you're going to have to get to days. Building heights, all of these things, they're all great points, but they all have their ups and downs. All methods are wrong, but please use one that helps you get to a date somehow. Some things to remember. Make sure, again, you understand the overall scope of what's trying to be achieved, what we're trying to achieve, and your part in it. So what's the overall goal, and how do you contribute to that? Don't just think about what you need to do to be done. What's the why? What's driving the timing? Remember right back at the beginning I said, signs you're in a project without really, no one's actually calling it a project. One of them was, people start talking about these dates in this quite agitated manner. Blah, 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 September, blah, 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 September 1st, September 1st, September 1st. You need to understand what's driving that deadline. Right? Is that really just an arbitrary date that's been pulled out, and perhaps it's important, maybe it's incredibly important to that client, perhaps it's not. What's driving it? Well, when people are getting excited about these things, it's usually like larger dependencies on things that you should know what they are. What is it in the organisation that is creating this date? People, these things are done for good reasons. Is it a media release? Is it a legislation change? Is it something the board has asked for? In one case, there was advertising. There was literally like some dignitary was literally going to walk down the red carpet and it was going to be filmed. This was when I was working at Telstra. That's a bloody good reason for this thing to need to happen on September 1st. Media time, advertising and TV time is booked a long way out. So find out what that driver is. It's really important to your success. And make sure you know who is your sponsor, who on the business side and the delivery side are sponsoring this activity. Here's an example of what release planning looks like. Alan Castles, he's now a thought worker in New York. At this point, he was at Lonely Planet. This is just one of them, but what these are, just to decode what's happening here. Each of those columns is kind of a feature of an image library, or sort of an area of it. So this one here might be upload, this might be image search, this one might be something else. So we can see all of the customer value, and then prioritized within each of those is each of the stories, each of which represent a kind of a smaller subset of the features. So within upload, there will be smaller features within that. Within image search, it might be super basic image search, then advanced image search, then search using an image. All of those prioritized. And over here is technical work that just needs to happen. The green cards is that. And the nice thing about this way is they were actually using points, is you can kind of give it a haircut based on the total number of points that you kind of know you have to spend. Rich Journal is probably taking this picture. He was in the room. So if you've kind of estimated these in points, for example, and you have like 600 program points, mega points to spend, then just by maths, you can kind of give this thing a haircut all the way through there, and you can say like, well, I want to spend the bulk of my points here because in the next 3 months, these are the most important things to deliver. Okay, we could skip that. You can kind of draw a line through all of that tells you how much you can get through, roughly. So that's an example of literally what release planning can look like. You change. Okay, we just have 10 minutes, so we're not going to finish this, but that's okay. Something's gone crazy here, just a moment. Bang. All right. At the beginning here, again, we were talking about basics here, but your ilities, what they're called, used to call them non-functional requirements. What a ridiculous name. The non-functional requirements. What? I just call them the ilities. These are all those things that you kind of, if you go and ask someone, do you want this? They'll go, yeah, I want that. Do you want reliability? Yeah. Do you want resilience? Yeah. Do you want integrity? Absolutely. You want scalability? Sure. Operability? Absolutely. Extensibility? Monitoring? Yes, please. Distributability? Continuity? Localization? Yes, please. Availability? I want all of it, right? But you can't have all of it. So you just do trade-off sliders. Get someone to pick 4 or 5 that really matter to them and do trade-off sliders early on. And don't let people photobomb your boring slides under any circumstances. So this is trade-off sliders here. These are some ilities of auditability, usability, securability, scalability, localization ability. And what we're doing is we're forcing people to make compromises here. And in this case, they've said the most important thing is usability, followed by security, followed by scalability, followed by availability, followed by localization. Trade-off sliders, cross-functional requirements, ilities, non-functional. You need to think about these things probably before you go into detailed release planning because they're going to affect how long things take.
I have a question there.
Yes.
Prachi here. Hi, Nick. Just a quick question. For all these ilities, do you actually put it separately, or isn't it just detail of any of your stories?
Yes. So these are, you can think of these, if a story is, as a blah, I want to blah so that I can blah, these are like in the paper that it's written on. Right? So once you decide that something like localization is important, meaning I need this feature to be able to behave differently in Beijing as it would in Melbourne, well then, yeah, that's kind of through, it's on the paper that those stories are written. It's like in the grain of the wood that this house is built in. It goes through everything. So you need to understand this early on because now for your release planning activities, this is going to affect these decisions are going to affect everything that comes afterwards. A classic one would be auditability, which is here the second least important one. For all of the financial work that we do, that's massive. Sarbanes-Oxley regulation, just one of the pieces of regulation that says you need to have a record of everything that happens in the system. Now, that's a significant amount of overhead for you, as opposed to, I don't really care, I just want the thing to work. So the ilities are super important and you need to understand them early on. But you need to force people to make trade-offs because otherwise, yeah, I want all those things, please. Do you want those? Yes. You need to have trade-offs. That's why we use trade-off sliders. And what time is it? Okay, 7 minutes. I'm actually going to finish up really soon because we've all got places to be at 9 o'clock probably. In fact, I won't even start this next part. I think I'll stop there and just allow everybody to go and do the things they need to do. Thank you very much for spending an hour of your morning with us. I'm sorry for ranting at you. I can't figure out a way to make it more interactive. And yes, we're recording all of these. We hope that we can find a way to get them out to thought workers so that they can learn and you can just listen on the tram or it's really easy like that. So thank you very much, everyone. And yes, next time, let's keep going with release planning. And then there's a few other bits and pieces. And I think one more session and we'll be done. Okay, bye.